1.
Part 1.
You will hear a woman asking for information over the phone. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good afternoon, Plainfield Community Centre.
Yes, hi. I'm new in town, and I was curious about the services the community centre has to offer.
We offer a variety of recreational activities. What were you interested in particular?
Well, everything, I guess. Okay, let's start with kids. I have a teenage son. What activities do you have for teens?
Right now, during the school year, we have tutoring sessions for children and teens in all subjects.
That would be good. He needs help with algebra.
We can certainly help with that. Just have him come by any Wednesday or Saturday afternoon. That's when the tutoring sessions are scheduled.
Fantastic! What about sports? Do you have sports activities for teens?
We have tennis lessons on Sunday mornings for teens and Sunday afternoon for adults.
I don't think my son would like that, but my husband might. For myself, I'd be more interested in yoga. Do you offer yoga classes?
We do. Our yoga classes take place on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. We divide it up into several groups, so there's one class for younger children, one for teens, and one for adults.
Really? I doubt my husband and son would be interested, but I'd like to sign up for yoga. I also like reading. Do you have any book clubs?
We have one just about to start. The first meeting will be next Friday morning. It will focus on early 20th century novels.
Too bad it's Friday morning. I think my son would enjoy it, but of course he's in school at that time.
Well, actually, that book club is for adults only. We may start one up for teens next summer, but we have nothing for that age group right now.
Oh well, I suppose he has enough to keep him busy for now. Now, what about fees? Do these classes and activities cost anything?
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
There's a small charge for non-members for each class. However, they're all free to members. Would you be interested in becoming a member?
How much does the membership cost?
Not much at all. The yearly fee is $75 for individuals and $225 for families.
What do I get with the membership?
You get free access to all classes and activities, and you can use our facilities like the tennis court, the exercise room and the meeting room.
It's not a bad deal, really. Could you tell me exactly where the centre is located?
It's at 107 Elliott Street.
Is that Elliot with 2 L's or 1 L?
1 L. E-L-I-O-T. It's right downtown.
I think I know where it is. Do you have free parking?
Yes. You can park just across the street. There's a garage there.
That sounds easy enough. Maybe I'll come in one day next week and sign up for some classes.
That would be fine. But don't come on Monday because we're closed that day. We're open Tuesday through Sunday.
Oh, thanks for telling me. Maybe I'll stop in on Tuesday then. Can I pay for the classes with a personal check?
We accept cheques and credit cards.
Okay, thank you very much. You've been very helpful.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear a talk by a counsellor on plans for the development of an old industrial site. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 13. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 13.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Councillor Norma Boyd, and welcome to this exhibition about the development of the old paper mill factory and gasworks site, which has been lying unused for more than a decade. There has been pressure on the council to use the land to build a training centre and a small business park. However, we have been encouraged by local people to create an open area for the benefit of the community, providing much-needed space for recreation. And I now have pleasure in announcing that the plans for the creation of a park, to be called Park Royal, and for flats, have now been approved. I'm also pleased to announce that we have secured sponsorship from local organisations. More detailed plans of the developments are available from the council website, details of which are in your pack. In the meantime, I'd just like to take you through the plan here on the screen.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 14 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer questions 14 to 20.
If we start here at the bottom, you can see Parkside Street, where the main entrance to the park is. On the left of the entrance, in the bottom left-hand corner of the plan, there will be a block of 40 studio flats. On the other side of the entrance, there will be some workshops for local businesses. There will also be another entrance here, on the top right, which leads into Pear Street. Here, in the centre of the park, we will have an ornamental lake with paths radiating north, south, east and west to the different areas of the park. In the top right-hand corner, just by the Pear Street entrance, there will be a large sports area with 2 football pitches and 4 tennis and volleyball courts. Just here, beside the pitches, on the same side of the path, will be an outdoor swimming pool. Now, in the top left-hand corner, a walled flower garden is planned with a rockery and a water feature with walkways, seats and lots of shady areas for the summer. Next to this, a sculpture garden is also planned. Now, let's see. Just here, Below the walled garden, there will be a grassy amphitheatre with a permanent covered stage for open-air concerts. We hope that local schools and colleges will use this theatre to showcase student work. In the bottom left-hand corner of the plan, you can see that above the block of flats there will be a play area for children, and directly to the right of this, just near the main entrance, there will be a wild area. More trees will be planted here, and in the middle will be built an educational centre for use by local schools to encourage children to take care of the wildlife and look after the trees and plants. And finally, in the bottom right-hand corner of the park will be a cafe, opening on to Pear Street. And now for questions. If anyone would like to ask anything, I and my colleagues are only too happy to oblige. Yes, the lady in the front row, if I could have your...
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear an extract from a talk about the congestion charging scheme.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
For more practical details, I'll pass you over to John Ward from the London Tourist Agency.
Thanks. So, that was a brief introduction to the congestion charging scheme. But if you're actually going to be driving your car in London on weekdays, there are a few more details you will need to know. Firstly, you don't need to worry about paying all the time. The charge applies between 7 in the morning and 6:30 in the evening, Monday to Friday. You'll be pleased to hear, however, that because the scheme is intended to reduce traffic during busy working hours, evenings and weekends are free. If you enter the zone during the charging times, you'll be eligible to pay the standard charge of £8, which you can pay until 10 o'clock on that day. After 10 o'clock, this charge rises to £10. But be warned, if you fail to pay before midnight, you will have to pay an automatic penalty charge. In other words, there's no escape. Let's move on to paying. The charge, as I've said, is £8 a day, and the authorities have set up a number of systems to make it easy for you to pay, or rather to ensure that nobody has a good excuse for not paying. So, using your credit card, you can pay by phone, by text message, or on the internet. The other option is to go to one of the 200 pay points inside the zone, or the 9,500 pay points elsewhere in the country. If you know you're going to be driving in and out of London on a regular basis, you can buy weekly, monthly or annual passes, rather like a railway season ticket.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
OK, on to the area itself. The congestion charging zone is everywhere inside London's inner ring road. For those of you not familiar with London's road system, this includes the City of London, that's the main financial district, and the West End, the commercial and entertainment centre. If you're still not sure, there are very clear signs on all roads which indicate when you are entering the area. These are round and have a white letter C on a red background. The scheme is policed by cameras which photograph all cars entering the area and send them to a computer which can recognise all British and European car registration plates. If you pay the £8 charge, you'll find London a little easier to drive round than it was before the charge was introduced. But if it's all too much trouble and you decide to leave your car at home, then you are left with public transport. That's trains, buses, taxis, or the underground. Some of the money from the congestion charging scheme is being used to upgrade public transport, so you should see improvements there. And because of reductions in the number of private vehicles on London's roads brought about by congestion charging, buses and taxis are providing a quicker, more efficient service than they did in the past. OK, I've covered the main details that you need to know.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
Section 4.
You will hear part of a lecture on art history.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
In the last lectures, we looked at the art of the ancient Egyptians, and then considered the art of other ancient Mediterranean civilizations, in particular Greece and Rome. We're now going to return to Egypt to consider a set of very unusual pictures known as the Fayum portraits. The Fayum is a lush green area about 100 kilometers west of Cairo. Following the conquest of Egypt by the Greek warrior Alexander the Great in 332 BC, large numbers of businessmen and officials who had come over from Greece settled in this fertile region with their families. They gradually adopted some features of Egyptian culture, including the practice of mummification, embalming the bodies of their dead and wrapping them in linen bandages in order to preserve them as mummies. The name actually comes from an Arabic word meaning an embalmed body. These newcomers made one distinctive innovation, though. After binding the mummy, they laid over the face a picture representing the person inside. The portraits look like oil on canvas, but they were actually produced using a technique called encaustic, where the artist applies pigmented wax to a wooden board with a small spatula. The Egyptologist William Petrie, who discovered many of these mummies with their accompanying portraits at the end of the 19th century, was convinced that they were actually done in the lifetime of the subject, rather than being painted after the person's death, as had been the case with older Egyptian paintings. He felt they were very different from the traditional stylized images that had been used on Egyptian mummy casings in previous centuries, and was convinced that they were actually portraits giving a realistic depiction of the person. He pointed out that the boards on which they were painted showed signs of having been cut down to size to fit within the mummy bandages. To him, this suggested that they may have originally been larger and been hung in the houses of the owners during their lifetimes. But more than a century after they came to light, nobody knew how far they were really depictions of real people, as against idealized portraits. Then a team from Manchester University decided to find out, by recreating the faces of Fayum mummies in clay and then comparing the reconstructions with the portraits. The team was provided with skulls from 2 Fayum mummies from the British Museum and given the information, based on X-rays and other evidence, that one of the mummies was of a 50-year-old man and the other was a woman in her early 20s. Armed only with this information, they set to work. First, they created copies of the skulls. Then they used clay to build up the facial muscles in order to reconstruct what the person looked like. After weeks of painstaking labour, 2 faces emerged. Only then were the 2 portraits revealed so that the match between the reconstructions and the portraits could be examined. In the case of the man, both model and portrait showed a broad, flat face with a slightly hooked nose and a fleshy mouth with broad lips, but the man in the portrait was noticeable for his 5 o'clock shadow, the beard beginning to grow around his chin and on his cheeks. This would have been quite a recognisable feature of the man in real life, and an easy thing for the painter to copy. However, it wasn't something that the makers of the model could know about. In the reconstruction, the right eye was slightly higher than the left, and this was the same on the portrait. But on the portrait, the eyes were very large, which is standard with many of the Fayum portraits, while in the model they were longer and narrower. The portrait of the woman appeared to be even more of a standard type, with her large eyes, straight nose, and small mouth. These pretty feminine features suggested this could be an idealized woman's face, and yet it proved to match the reconstruction surprisingly closely. The proportions of the lower face corresponded, and so did those of the forehead, though in the portrait the eyes were closer together and larger than in the reconstruction. And in both cases, the head was set on a solid neck, suggesting a more powerful physique than you might have expected from these delicate features. So, overall, the similarities between the portraits and the models are too close to be accidental. The artists may have started from a standard picture, but attempts were made to modify this to reflect the characteristics of the subject, what gave the face its personal qualities. Obviously, this isn't much of a sample upon which to judge an entire genre of portraiture, but the researchers are convinced that, on the whole, the artists aimed to represent their subjects as they appeared in real life, whether this was flattering to them or not.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.